I was sitting at my own birthday dinner when I heard my daughter-in-law say my name in a voice I'd never heard her use before. Not the sweet, slightly performative voice she used when she handed me cards on Father's Day. Not the careful, measured tone she used when she disagreed with me about something. This was different, lower, sharper, like she was talking about a problem that needed solving. I shouldn't have heard it at all. The whole thing was my son's idea. A dinner for my 68th birthday, just the family, at his house out in Claremont. My son Owen, my daughter-in-law Stella, my 8-year-old granddaughter Bea, who had spent the entire afternoon insisting she be allowed to put the candles on the cake herself, which meant they were crooked and slightly melted from being handled too much, and which I thought was the most beautiful cake I'd ever seen in my life. It was supposed to be a good night, and most of it was. After dinner, I stepped out to the back porch to get some air. My knees had been bothering me. I'd had a partial replacement done the previous spring, and I still couldn't sit in one position for too long without stiffening up. Owen's back porch looks out over a small yard he's been meaning to resod for 3 years, and there's a wooden bench out there that I like. I sat down. I could hear the party through the sliding glass door. Bea laughing, some music playing low, the sound of dishes being cleared. Then I heard Stella's voice. She was just inside, near the kitchen window, which was cracked open maybe 2 inches. I don't think she knew I was out there. I don't think she would have said what she said if she had. He's not going to be around forever, Diane. A pause. I know, but we need to move before Owen finds out how much we actually owe. I sat very still. The house is in his name. Everything is in his name. We just need him to sign over the secondary account, and Diane says her guy can handle the rest. Another pause. Longer. Owen won't ask questions. He never does. She laughed at something. Quiet, private. The laugh of someone who has had this conversation before. Then she walked back toward the dining room, and I heard her voice change again. Light, warm, effortless. As she called out to my son that she was going to start on the dishes. I sat on that bench for a long time after that. Let me tell you something about my son that you need to understand. Owen is a good man. He is, genuinely, one of the best people I know. He is kind in the way that some people are kind, not because they're performing it, but because it costs them nothing to be. He's been that way since he was small. When he was 7 years old, he cried because he accidentally stepped on a frog. When he was in high school, he stayed late after a school play to help a kid in his class carry props to a car, a kid he barely knew. He became an accountant, which sounds unremarkable, but he's the kind of accountant who actually answers his clients' calls and remembers their kids' names. He is also, and I say this with love, not built for suspicion. He does not assume the worst about people. He sees the best in nearly everyone he meets. He saw the best in Stella when he met her at a conference 9 years ago. She was in finance then, sharp, well-dressed, confident in a way that Owen found magnetic. I understood why he fell for her. She was impressive. Still is, in certain ways. But impressive and trustworthy are not the same thing. And somewhere along the way I think I'd started confusing them myself. She had always been a little distant with me. Not cold. Nothing you could point to. Just a kind of careful warmth. The kind you get from someone who is managing you rather than knowing you. I told myself it was just personality. Some people don't open up easily. I'd lost my wife, Owen's mother, 6 years before that birthday dinner, and I think part of me had just been so relieved that Owen had someone that I didn't look too carefully at who that someone was. After the bench, I started looking. I didn't say anything to Owen. Not right away. What would I have said? I heard your wife on the phone and I'm worried. About what exactly? I had fragments. Names I didn't recognize. A Diane who had a guy. Something about a secondary account and signing things over. It sounded bad. It felt bad, in the way that a smell can tell you something is wrong before you can identify what's rotting. But I was 68 years old, and I had learned, the hard way, over many years, that feeling certain and being right are two very different things. So I waited. I watched. What I did first was simple. I called my banker, a man named Pruitt, who I've known for 15 years, and I asked him to flag my accounts for any unusual activity. I told him someone may have gotten access to my information. He didn't push for details. He just said he'd watch it and call me if anything moved. Then I started paying attention to Stella in a different way. Not hostile. Not obvious. I've been playing cards since I was 19 years old, and I know how to keep my face neutral. I just watched. The way she watched me during family dinners. The questions she started asking, gently, casually. The way you pull on a thread without seeming to pull. How was my doctor's appointment? Had I thought about updating my estate paperwork? One evening, she mentioned very lightly that a friend of hers worked with a financial planner who specialized in seniors, and wouldn't it be smart to consolidate things before it got complicated? I said I'd think about it. I thought about something else entirely. The name Diane took me 3 weeks to trace. I'm not a detective. I'm a retired high school history teacher from Provo, Utah, who likes woodworking and watches too much baseball. I didn't have tools or contacts or any of the things people use in movies. What I had was time and stubbornness and the internet, which turns out to be enough if you're patient. I knew Stella had a sister. They weren't close, or so Stella had always said. Her name was Diane, and she lived somewhere in Nevada. I'd met her once at the wedding briefly. Thin woman, dark hair, a kind of restless energy that made you feel like she was always calculating something. I found her through a combination of Stella's old Facebook posts, which she'd mostly locked down but not entirely, and some light searching on county property records. Diane had moved, not just once, 4 times in 6 years, each time from somewhere with public records showing small claims filed against her, creditors, a landlord dispute, a contractor who said she'd never paid. I'm not a suspicious man by nature, but I'm a history teacher. I know how to read a pattern. And then Pruitt called me. He said it quietly, the way people say things they know are going to land hard. Someone had called his branch, not online, in person, asking about my estate accounts, claiming to be conducting a routine review on my behalf. They'd been turned away because the request didn't match our verification protocol. Pruitt had noted the name they gave. It was Diane. I sat down at my kitchen table and I didn't move for a while. My house is quiet. It's been quiet since my wife passed. In the particular way a house gets quiet when the person who filled it is gone. I sat in that quiet, and I thought about my son, who trusts people, who cries over frogs, who still calls me every Sunday without fail. I thought about what Stella had said on that porch. Owen won't ask questions. He never does. And I made a decision. I called a lawyer. His name is Bowen Atchley, and he's handled my affairs since before Owen was born. He's in his 70s now, slow-moving and sharp as a tack, and when I told him what I knew, he listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about him. When I finished, he said, "Did you write any of this down?" I had. Dates, times, what Pruitt told me, what I'd found on Diane. He said, "Good. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone into your financial records, and if Stella brings up the planner again, tell her you're already working with someone." Then he said something I've been thinking about ever since. He said, the people who do this kind of thing count on the person being too embarrassed to say anything, too afraid of looking foolish, too worried about the family falling apart. They count on your silence. I told them I wasn't going to be silent. "Good," he said. "Then let's move fast." Bowen contacted the bank and had formal fraud alerts placed on all of my accounts. He also, through channels I don't fully understand, reached out to a contact at the county DA's office. Not to file charges yet, there wasn't enough for that, but to put the situation on record, timestamp everything. Meanwhile, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called Owen. I want to tell you this was easy. It wasn't. Sitting across from your child, even when your child is a 41-year-old man with his own mortgage and his own gray hairs, and telling him that the woman he loves may be plotting against you is one of the hardest things I have ever done. I have buried a wife. I have had health scares that kept me awake for weeks. Nothing felt quite like sitting at Owen's kitchen table while Stella was at yoga and watching my son's face as I told him what I'd heard. He didn't believe me at first, not because he thought I was lying, but because his brain wouldn't let him. I watched him go through the stages: confusion, then something like argument, then a long silence where he stared at the table, and I could see him working through every memory he had of her, trying to fit this new information against all of it. He asked me if I was sure. I told him what Pruitt had told me. I showed him the document Bowen had prepared, the timeline, Diane's record, the in-person attempt at the bank. He read it twice. He set it down. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough to make sure you wouldn't have to take my word for it." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he got up and stood at the sink, looking out the window at that yard he's been meaning to resod, and I could see his shoulders doing that thing they've done since he was a little boy when he's trying not to fall apart. I let him have the time. I didn't try to fix it. What happened next moved faster than I expected. Bowen had found something. Not just Diane, Stella herself had a paper trail that predated my son by 4 years. A civil suit settled quietly, involving a former employer and missing funds. It had been expunged from the main search results, but not from the archived court dockets. Bowen knew where to look. Owen hired his own attorney. There were conversations I wasn't part of, because they were between Owen and his lawyer, and then between Owen and Stella, and that was as it should be. He was the one whose life was in the middle of all this. He was the one who had to sit across from her and understand what their marriage had actually been. I don't know exactly what was said. He's told me some of it over time, that she didn't deny it entirely, that she said it was Diane's idea, which may or may not be true, that she cried, and that he didn't know what to do with the crying because he still wasn't sure how much of her was real. What I do know is that Diane was referred to the DA's office on attempted financial fraud. The case was still being reviewed as of the last I heard. Bowen was confident, and Owen filed for divorce. I won't pretend that everything that came after was clean. It wasn't. There were weeks when Owen barely talked. Not to me, not to anyone. He showed up to Sunday dinners because he's Owen, and that's what he does. But he was somewhere else behind his eyes, and I didn't push. I made food, and I let him sit, and sometimes we watched baseball and didn't say anything. And I think that was what he needed. Bea took it hard. The way children take things hard. Not always loudly, but deeply. She started asking whether she would still see her dad all the time, whether things would be different. I told her that some things would be different, but that her dad loved her more than anything in the world, and that part would never change. She looked at me with those serious eyes she has, my granddaughter, and she said, "What about you, Grandpa?" I told her that part would never change either. I meant it. I want to be honest about something because I think it matters. There is a version of this story where I looked like I handled everything perfectly, where I was calm and strategic and never doubted myself. That version isn't true. There were nights in that 3-week stretch when I second-guessed everything I'd heard. When I sat on my porch, my own porch, back home in Provo, and thought, maybe I misheard. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I'm a lonely old man who's been widowed too long and is reading threat into a conversation he caught a fragment of through a cracked window. I almost talked myself out of it twice. What stopped me, both times, was Pruitt's call. The fact of Diane walking into that bank. The fact of someone using my name and claiming authority over my finances. Those were not fragments. Those were facts. And I thought about what my wife would have said. She was a practical woman, more practical than me in most things. She would not have told me to be suspicious of everyone, but she also would not have told me to look away from something I'd seen with my own eyes. She would have said, "Trust yourself enough to find out if you're right." I'm glad I did. It's been about 14 months since that birthday dinner. Owen is doing better. Not all the way. I don't think that kind of thing heals all the way, not quickly, but better. He's seeing someone, a counselor, I mean. He started resodding that yard finally. He had Bea help him pick out the grass seed, which she took very seriously, and last time I visited it was coming in green and uneven in the best possible way. I turned 69 last month. Small dinner. Just Owen and Bea. and a neighbor of mine, a widower named Claude, who likes woodworking as much as I do. Bia put the candles on the cake again. They were crooked again. I didn't mind. There are things I've learned from this that I didn't expect to learn at 68 years old. I learned that listening carefully is a different skill than hearing. I learned that asking for help, from Bowen, from Pruitt, even from Owen when the time finally came, is not a weakness. I spent most of my adult life thinking that asking for help is what you do when you failed to figure it out yourself. I was wrong about that. Asking for help is what you do when you're smart enough to know what you need. I learned that people who mean to take from you count on your silence and your embarrassment and your fear of disrupting the people you love. They count on you, weighing the cost of speaking against the cost of staying quiet and deciding that quiet is safer. It isn't. And I learned, the one I keep coming back to, that being someone's parent doesn't end. It doesn't end when they grow up, when they marry, when they have children of their own. It just changes shape. For 30 years, protecting Owen meant making sure he had enough to eat and someone to talk to, and the belief that he was capable of more than he thought. At 68, it meant sitting on a bench in the dark and listening to something I wasn't supposed to hear, and then deciding what to do with it. I chose to do something. I would do it again.